Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name's Mel. I'm a somatic experiencing practitioner, a relationship coach, and I work with the queer and questioning and those who love them who are exploring consensual non monogamy. And I am here with my wonderful colleague, Megan. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you. Hello, I am Megan Veaudry. I am a relationship coach based in Vancouver, BC. And yes, I am. Mel and I are co-facilitating a monthly community discussion group in Vancouver, and we are here to do a little recap on that discussion group. Do you want to share more about that, Mel?
Yeah, first of all, I love that we've kind of inherited this Poly 101 discussion group. We're not the creators of that model, but it's been so lovely to see the community coming together for, 6 months now. I think this was
Yeah,
like number 6 or 7.
I
I'm
think so.
losing track, which is a good sign. And and every single time there's such a rich conversation. And I think my favorite moments are seeing where people are putting the puzzle pieces together in a way that they haven't.
Yeah.
And that always is like, this is worth it. And it's not us doing that, we're just holding the space. It's the collective wisdom. So on that note, our collective topic was polycules, anarcules, and more, and looking at relational networks that we experience in polyamory and relationship anarchy and other forms of expansive relating. And this was your topic pick.
Yes, this was my topic pick. Yeah, and this is a topic that I am so passionate about because I, for many, many years, have been part of like a subculture, community would be a strong word, but like a subculture scene where non monogamy is almost the norm. I have had folks
Mhm.
come to me and say, "Oh, like I've decided to be in a monogamous relationship with my partner," almost as if they're a little bit embarrassed or they might get some pushback about it. And that's not
Yeah.
just that the experience of having a friend approach me in that way is not isolated to me as a relationship coach. That is an experience that folks in this scene have because of the normalization around non-monogamy. And so because of that, these relationship networks are vast and go
Mhm.
really deep. Yeah, and so that's why I think this topic of and I love this topic as well because just because relational love is presented as a completely dyadic activity, as dyads being the only option in our culture, relationship networks are such an important topic because they're so under discussed and underappreciated and under misunderstood. So yeah, that was kind of the inspiration for this topic, I guess.
I 100% agree. And I love that you threw in the word anarcules into the topic heading, because this is a word that I define in my book, Radical Relating, which I have right next to me for those watching the video.
Yes.
And the idea of an anarchule is that relational network that isn't limited to the romantic partnerships that you have. And this is something that I've observed when people have been very, I think, heavily invested in their non monogamy and their polyamory.
Mm,
Maybe they have a polycule, but are they replicating that mononormative behavior of abandoning their friendships because they're now in all these romantic relationships? And there's a logistical piece to that where it takes a lot of time and energy to date lots of people, and so we may feel like we have not as much left over for the people we aren't dating, and I don't think that's a good thing. And for me as a relationship anarchist, I was like, the people who are deepest and closest to me are not necessarily my partners.
mhm.
And I don't want to hold an expectation of that depth and closeness with all the people that I date, that
Mhm.
I'm gonna be in a polycule with everyone.
Yeah.
Because I've had that experience of being way too enmeshed in a polycule that I didn't actually wanna be part of, and beyond the person I was dating.
Yeah.
And so this idea of an anarchule, an anarchist molecule of
Mhm.
connections came up.
Mhm.
So I thought I would throw in that definition, for anyone listening who's not heard the word before.
Yes, I'm very glad you did. It's such a powerful concept, and so I'm really, really glad that you're defining it in your book and bringing it to the world. And I'm really thinking about the depth of relationships that have flowed through my life, and
Mhm.
how, knowing people, and I'm thinking of a few people, that have been really significant characters in my life over the years, that were at one point lovers or partners, but then shifted into some other kind of role in my life, and that I still maintain like very close relationships with to this day. And consider, and I'm sure I imagine that you have a similar experience, Mel, of considering these people like just very foundational characters in your life. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I have partners from very early on in my non-monogamy journey, partners who maybe we only dated for a couple of months, but there was a strong friendship. They introduced me to their network of people. I found some of my best friends through that network. There's still someone I know I can call up for collaborative work and things like that. And I think this is one of the pieces that did come up in the discussion, is that within a non-monogamous framework, breakups aren't always a complete break. Sometimes they
Mhm.
are, and sometimes it feels like they need to be.
Mhm.
And so there's also a kind of tension in there that we touched on a little bit in the discussion, I think, but that there isn't there isn't by default this idea like we're never going to talk to each other again.
Mhm. Mhm.
There's more of a sense of let's reconfigure how can we love each other in good ways? And
Mhm.
that's actually one of the pieces I wish we could have talked more about.
Mhm.
Um, but I want to start off with like some of the pieces early on in the conversation. People started talking about like the configurations of relationships. Like, you know,
Yeah.
you can be solo, you can be nesting, you can be in a triad or a quad or a V, or there's all these different permutations. And um, people were started talking about like the pros and cons of some of them. And I'm curious for you, like you already mentioned like some of the benefits of having that network, but what
Mhm.
are some of the cons of having like being part of a polycule or an anarchule?
Well, the thing that comes to mind first is I like to think of the metamor relationship. I like to compare it to in-laws. So your
Mm,
metamors, your partner's other partners, are not people that you would necessarily choose to have in your life, but they are in your life because they're connected to someone that you do choose to have in your life. And so, this is me approaching gently the topic that, we don't always get along with our in laws. We don't always get along with our metamors. So, some of the cons of polycules are, having to have people that you may not necessarily choose in a space of trust with you.
yeah,
So, and that, we always say, polyamory is just so full of growth opportunities. And so this can be one of those growth opportunities, right? Is understanding people that you might not necessarily choose. You might have different communication styles. You
mhm,
will definitely have different needs and boundaries. And so learning how to navigate those relationships is really challenging. And it's a big part of what we have to overcome and what we have to grow into when we choose polyamory. And a big reason for that is we do not have a playbook for this.
yeah,
We are fed monogamy as the default only relationship style. And so we don't have a model for like how to get along with your husband's girlfriend. We just don't
yeah,
have it. And as much as we need it, and we're developing this as we go along, like me and other relationship coaches and polyamory content creators, we're developing this playbook and this normalization around these relationships that we're taught to really have a really negative view on. We're taught to only really have a
mhm,
negative view on these metamor
mhm.
relationships, and so needing to overcome those tendencies is definitely a con of relationship networks. It's
And
a challenge.
I think one of the challenges that adds into that is when that polycule becomes a bit of an echo chamber.
Hmm.
Right,
Yeah.
and I've seen this happen in poly spaces. I've been through this experience too, of
Mm.
the friends that you have as your like polyamorous confidants
Mhm.
in a non-monogamous space end up somehow entangled in your relational network, and suddenly it doesn't feel appropriate to go to them to say,
Mhm.
hey, I'm having some problems, can we talk this through, can you help me like figure this out?
Mhm.
um and there's also sometimes I've seen some polycules become a little bit of like an echo chamber.
Mhm.
Like, this is our way of doing polyamory, so you have
Mhm.
to conform to our way
Mhm.
of doing
Mhm.
polyamory.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
that is
Mhm.
not a
Mhm.
good time
Mhm. Mhm.
because there is no one true way to do polyamory.
Absolutely. Yes. And so, like I talked about, there's the challenge of overcoming different communication styles, of overcoming different needs and boundaries. But the
Mhm.
solution is not to have this, like you're talking about, this echo chamber, this unilateral way of doing polyamory, right? So we're
Mhm.
kind of seeing some opposites here. And as always, I'm curious, like what's in between, like what are the subtleties that we can explore in there?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Some people talked about how, like, being part of that network, like, just stepping into I think, we kind of got into a discussion of, like, what is it like to actually step into polyamory in practice, not just
Mhm.
theoretical?
Mhm.
And how there's a lot of fear that can come up for people, and that fear, kicks in their monogamy hangover, like, kicks in the
Mhm.
internalized mononormative thinking.
Yeah.
And you were referencing that with, like, how do we engage with our metamors? Because we don't have a script for that, right?
Yeah.
The only
Yeah.
thing that we're given to in monogamous scripts is the other woman, or the person
Mhm.
your partner's had an affair with, or the
Mhm. Mhm.
mistress,
Mhm.
or
Yeah.
mister, or usually it's so funny, it's always these feminine gendered terms.
I wonder why.
Right, that we could go down some rabbit holes there.
Oh,
Um
that's another topic for another discussion.
But we have to write the script as we go. We have to write our own script, and we're really
Yes.
improvising it a lot.
Yeah.
And I think that intersecting in that is very often a lot of couple-centric behavior,
Mm.
you know, I think it's slightly different depending on whether someone starts from being unpartnered versus when someone starts with a previously monogamous partner.
Mhm.
But no matter where you start from, there's going to be some kind of internalized couple centric expectation, whether that's expecting the relationship escalator, or sometimes I think people are dismissive of the secondary and tertiary connections,
Mhm.
the connections that come after them, not
Mhm.
necessarily even if they're hierarchical.
Mhm.
Um, and and that can lead people to exclude a person from the conversation.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
And it's I mean, I've said this, I know we've talked about this before. Every single time I see drama erupt in a polycule, it is because someone should have been included in a conversation and they
Mhm.
weren't.
Yes.
And usually that exclusion of a person has happened because we're so used to having these like one-on-one conversations. We forget that what we're talking about is going to include more people.
Yes.
And it's scary because we don't have a lot of practice of having emotionally charged conversations with multiple people.
Yes. Thank you so much for pointing that out. That is very true. We don't have a lot of practice with including more people in conversations that are emotionally challenging.
Yeah.
And I even in some polyamorous spaces, I see this idea that when trouble comes, when we need to have emotionally charged conversations, we should be retracting back to,
Yes.
in the case of partner polyamory, like that original couple, right? Which I often don't think is the solution, because then, as you said, we're leaving someone out of the conversation, right?
Yeah.
So I think really questioning that underlying idea of the dyad being the most stable configuration.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that ties into the experience of attachment,
Mhm.
and I tried not to talk too much about this at the discussion because I could probably talk for hours and hours. So please feel free to interrupt me. that, the the studies that gave us attachment theory as we know it today were done around the same time that we
Mm.
had all this propaganda around the nuclear family. And we had this huge push from governments and institutions to get women out of the workplace and back into the home, and let's get everyone their own appliances because we have all these factories that we're making ammunitions that we now need to repurpose for other
Mhm,
industry,
mhm,
and so on and so forth. And we
mhm,
end up in these very siloed nuclear family units. But that's not how we grew up, right? Attachment theory, everybody talks about it from this couple centric perspective.
mhm,
We didn't evolve that way. We evolved in villages, we evolved in groups, in
mhm,
extended family, with kinship networks.
mhm,
And and so there's always, to me, there's always that potential. It's not
mhm,
necessarily a guarantee,
mhm.
but it's that potential for polyamory to be a way that we get to, I think, heal these big attachment wounds that we're now
Mm,
multiple generations deep in.
mhm. Yeah, absolutely. This is also something that I can talk for hours about. But yes, but I'm so glad that you brought that up about attachment theory. That's something that's very much been on my mind lately, is how this, this dyadic look, dyad based look at attachment
Mhm.
does set us up for um, examining attachment from a dyad perspective, right? And so, when we are exploring polyamory, there is a lot of new ground to be explored.
And it's inherently fragile, I
Mhm,
think, that dyad, and we see that happen when, like you were describing, when there's friction and people pull back
mhm,
what they consider to be the pre-existing couple or the
mhm,
primary couple, or
mhm,
whatever that might look like, um, because they're wanting to reinforce.
mhm.
And I always go back to, like, in, I think it's in Bowen family systems, they talk about 3 is the most stable configuration,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
There because in 3, you get to do a little bit of healthy triangulation.
Yeah.
And I think in polycule networks, we do have both healthy and unhealthy triangulation going on.
Yes.
There's the healthy triangulation of, like, hey, our mutual partner's birthday is coming up. Let's do
Mhm,
something special, or
mhm,
whatever that is.
mhm, mhm,
And
mhm, mhm,
there's the unhealthy triangulation of, like, oh my God, you're my enemy. I'm jealous. Da 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 da.
mhm, mhm, mhm,
Um,
mhm.
and I think that and we got to talk a little bit on the triangulation piece during the discussion. I'm curious, what do you think helps folks with the like being able to focus on being like there in the healthy way, and like showing up as a good member of a polycule, basically?
Oh, like healthy triangulation, like you're talking to, and not just triangulation, but showing up as a healthy member of a polycule.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like what people have to cultivate definitely depends on what they come with, right? So if folks
Mhm.
come with a more anxious attachment style, they have to cultivate very different things than folks who come with an avoidant attachment style. So, but speaking to it generally, I mean, I always go back to the self, like knowing yourself, really tuning into what your emotions are, what needs are under those emotions, and then how you can communicate and share those in a way that's likely to be received. So I hear all the time from clients, they say, it was like we thought we had such a good conversation. We went away from a conversation feeling like we had a shared understanding. But then afterwards, what happened showed that we really didn't understand each other at all. So, learning how to both come to conversations, like I call them relationship optimization conversations sometimes, but coming to these conversations when you're talking about how, like, what agreements you're going to have, how, like, what you can expect from each other, how you're
Mhm.
going to go about engaging in your relationship now that it's shifting or changing in some way because of polyamory. How, like, coming to that conversation with courage and then with some preparation so that you know what you need. so that when you are actually in the conversation, you can share that. And then, yeah, and then really not being afraid to get granular. I think that that's oftentimes where people kind of go off track, is not having enough courage to mention all of like this, like getting, okay, so what does that mean exactly? You know,
Yeah.
what does that really mean? Like, what are you hoping to get out of that? What do you hope to achieve with asking me
Mhm.
that? You know, and not being afraid to go in deeper layers. And I think
Mhm.
so those are all things that I think really go a long way towards showing up as, yeah, as a healthy polycule member. And then also making sure to resource yourself with relationships outside. Like we have mentioned this already, but in this context particularly, I don't think that you can show up as a, if you are a person who, especially if you're a person who tends to need external processing, to want to talk about what's happening for you so that you can understand yourself better, you really need to resource yourself with people outside of your relational system. So
Yes,
you need
you
your besties, you need your, you know, whoever you talk to, your family members, whoever that is, like whoever you talk to, you really need to be connected to people outside of your relational system. And they cannot be robots. Do not talk to ChatGPT about your relationships. It will
don't even
not
get me
help you.
started.
It will not help you have better relationships. I promise.
The
Yeah,
AIs do not have nervous systems. They cannot give you advice.
no, no, I've seen it go so wrong so many times.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I think that like those are a few things. I could go on, but really just I want to come back to knowing yourself and knowing that you matter. Knowing that you matter and also the other people matter. If you start to get into a struggle and a fight for who matters more, it's a game that nobody wins, and it's about sharing responsibility and sharing care and really seeing things as a system instead of coming at things um, from an individualistic perspective.
I love how you just put that, and the framework that I've been playing with recently as I've been rewriting my monogamy detox course
Mm,
is, we have the imposed colonial patriarchal mononormative narrative that gives us that very much like you are supposed to do X, Y, and Z. And in
mhm,
that we don't really get a whole lot of agency.
yeah.
And and as we pull ourselves out of that, we have to find ourselves. We have to get more connected to our self-connect relationship.
Mhm,
Um, Jessica Fern calls it self-secure attachment. I call it self-partnership,
yeah.
however you want to name it. It's that being really deeply connected to
Mhm,
yourself.
yeah.
But there's a shadow side of that where people go
Mhm.
into hyper individualistic
Yes.
and I think sometimes that happens also because it's traumatizing. Not all polycules networks are the right one for you.
Mhm,
And so we can sometimes get hyper individualistic, pull back so far
mhm,
that we are creating our own obstacles to connection.
mhm. Yeah.
And to me, this idea of being able to be in an anarcule or a polycule, basically being able to show up for the relationships that are in the wider ecosystem,
Mhm,
whatever the nature of those relationships might
mhm,
be, there's something about that that's to me that's the rewilding. To me,
mhm,
that's the interdependent thing that we're discovering. We know who we are, and that gives us the basis for being able to go, okay, together, who do we
mhm,
become?
mhm,
You
mhm,
know,
mhm,
let's explore what we co-create.
mhm,
The most dynamic anarcules out there are the ones that really put in that energy and that effort to co-create.
mhm,
They're not in competition,
mhm,
right? And I
mhm,
think they're still like, when we are still focusing on learning who we are, it can sometimes feel like we're in competition or that any little threat's going to trigger those like big self assertive responses.
mhm,
Uh,
mhm,
and it's something so lovely when you do get to that point of being able to just to just exhale and breathe and find that ease in the wider network.
mhm. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, one of the questions, I don't remember if we got to this or not, but what one of the questions I wanted to ask is, what are some strategies we can use to create
Mm,
more equity in our
yeah,
relationship networks?
we didn't get to that
We
question because the
didn't.
conversation that was happening in the discussion was so good.
I know, it was so good. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think for me, and maybe this is just because I've been writing about this the last few days, I think
Mhm,
one of the strategies is understanding the ways that power and privilege can be playing into the network. Because I
mhm,
think there's vectors of that that are more obvious, I
mhm,
would like to think, in terms of like gender, ethnicity, language, ability, etc.
mhm,
And there's aspects of power and privilege that may not be so obvious,
mhm,
like which experience someone has in non-monogamy.
mhm,
Someone,
mhm,
I think there's also levels of ageism that can come into there.
mhm,
The amount of work we've been able to do, the resources we've had to
mhm,
support our journey and
mhm,
unpacking like sexual
mhm,
shame or things like
mhm,
that.
mhm, mhm,
And yeah, as we get more aware of that, learning how to balance and noticing where our power may be taking up space from other people.
mhm, mhm, mhm. Absolutely. Yeah, those are all really important things, and power can show up in so many ways.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I think being aware of power as and when it shows up,
Yeah.
and knowing how to work with that when it comes is really important as well.
Yeah,
It can come
yeah,
from
finding
unexpected places
finding the
sometimes.
collaborative.
Yeah, finding the collaborative, exactly. Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah. What other strategies would you include?
Yeah, all of the ones you mentioned, and in terms of creating equity, I think acknowledging what how equity needs to be created in an ongoing way.
Yeah.
So knowing that just because privilege showed up in a certain way at one point doesn't mean, or that you expect it to show up in a certain point, doesn't mean
Mhm.
that it will necessarily show up in that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And so I think it comes back to that self-awareness piece and self-partnership piece around recognizing where you may be empowered or disempowered, and knowing how to speak to that, and how to call in more collaboration in an ongoing way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not a one and done.
It's not a one and done. Yeah.
It is an ongoing conversation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
That's been so good. Glancing at my notes, and I'm like, I feel like we managed to cover a lot of the points that were brought up in the discussion. I, I'm curious if there's anything else for you that comes up that you're like, "Ooh, I wanted to make sure we talk about this."
Hmm, I think hmm. We didn't really get to, and actually this is I would love to ask you this question because I know you'll have some good answers for this. How about over so in the context of a polycule, we talked about
Mhm.
metamors and how you don't necessarily choose your metamors. How about overcoming things like differences in communication style, differences in differences in communication style, differences in um like, how do I say it, like experience in polyamory might be a way to put that.
Yeah.
What do you think of that, and how to create equity in terms of those, like when those differences come up, and how to create harmony when those differences come up?
I think one of the things is to just embrace that there may not always be perfect harmony.
Mm,
And I think building that inner tolerance around that, like a bit of resilience, that
mm,
it's okay if we're not all communicating the same way. And maybe I say that because 'cause I'm a third culture kid and I've lived in different countries and had to code switch between different cultures. So I'm
mhm,
just like, "Yeah, okay, we'll
mhm,
adapt."
mhm,
Um, but I think bigger than that is to create spaciousness.
mhm,
One of the pitfalls I've seen is so many of us get into polyamory with a little bit of a fantasy of like, one day I'll have the perfect polycule, and we'll
Mhm.
have our little village of tiny homes, and we'll all share everything, and there's many variations on a theme.
Yeah.
And the hunger for that
Mhm.
can be so deep that we rush to try and get there.
Mhm.
And we lend our trust before we've established foundations.
Mhm.
I've had this experience, and I've written about it a little bit on Substack years ago, of feeling like I was forced to show up in a certain way in a polycule, and it wasn't
Mm.
how I wanted to show up at all.
Mhm.
And I feel like if there had been a little more spaciousness and a little more patience,
Mhm.
it would have given us more time to figure out where we all authentically met. But
Mm.
because there was this kind of, and it was collective, there was a collective sense of urgency, and a desperate need to go deep.
Mhm.
Um, we skipped those steps.
Mhm.
And that's where the friction started to come up, because when you skip those steps, then you're running on the projection and the fantasy of what this polycule could be, and
Mhm.
not actually, reality checking it
Mhm.
as you go. So I think that having the spaciousness, having the patience, allowing each individual relationship within a network to be tended at its own pace
Mhm.
is really, really important.
Mhm. 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 Yeah, absolutely. There's wisdom in there. Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Thank
On
you
that,
so much.
I feel like this is a good spot for us to wrap up today. How do you feel?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I feel like that both I feel like we were able to speak about how meaningful the in-person discussion group was, but I'm also appreciating that we got to go a little bit further and explore some of the questions we didn't have time to get to. So, yeah,
Definitely.
that's I think
Yeah.
great. Yeah. Yeah, and just to let folks know, the discussion groups are, they are really special and they're really meaningful. It's so wonderful to get together in a room with other humans and get to have these live discussions, these really deep, interesting conversations that we likely wouldn't make time for or make space for or have the courage for if they weren't in this facilitated space. So,
Well,
yeah, I really, really encourage folks if you're at all curious to come out. And they're also very casual, folks from of all walks of life, all ages, all different experience levels in polyamory show up, and there's often new folks. So, yeah, there's it yeah it I hope that, sorry, I just had a little computer glitch there, but yes, please do come out if you're at all considering it. It's a really accessible environment, so yeah, we would love to see you. It's a really great opportunity to connect and share with other polyamorous folks.
yeah. And the next Vancouver Poly 101 discussion will be on the first Tuesday of June,
Mhm.
which I believe is the third. The third? No, the second, something like that. It's early June,
Early June.
and I think maybe it's the second.
First Tuesday
And
in June.
first Tuesday in June,
Yeah.
Vancouver Poly 101. You can find the details on Plura, or if you're not able to access Plura, you can always message one of us through
Mhm.
our social media channels. You can find me at Radical Relating on Instagram, Substack, and Facebook. And you can find Megan.
Yes, you can find me at Non Monogamy Coaching Vancouver, mostly on Instagram, but I'm on Facebook and Substack as well.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, everybody who joined us live. And thanks for listening
Yeah.
if you're catching the recording.
Yes, and have a wonderful day, everyone.